This is my first video, and I'm glad you've started watching it. It takes a lot of time to make a video like this, so I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe and give it a like. Let's get to the story.
The phone rang at the exact moment I was taking my reheated dinner out of the microwave. The name on the screen was Taro, a guard from the private club Oasis. I answered after the second ring, expecting a routine question about a debt or a request for help with a car. Instead, a heavy silence hung on the line. "Kenji, sorry for calling so late," Taro said in a low voice, as if he was speaking from a storage room with his hand over the microphone. "Your wife is here, at the club." I looked at the 2 plates of rice I had just placed on the table. Akiko had written an hour earlier that she was staying late at work because of an urgent quarterly report. She is not alone. She just entered the VIP room on the 3rd floor with Satoshi Yamamoto, Taro said, and every word landed against my ribs, like a hammer. Yamamoto, the corporation owner, the billionaire, the man whose face stared from the covers of every business magazine in Tokyo. My wife was in his private lounge right now. In situations like that, people usually start shouting, ask stupid questions, or demand that someone turn on a camera immediately. I felt my pulse rise slightly. It lasted exactly 1 second. Then an old reflex activated. My breathing slowed, my emotions shut down, and my mind switched into crisis negotiator mode. Did she look upset? Was anyone forcing her to go there? My voice was so even that Taro fell silent for a moment. "No, Kenji." She was laughing. She was holding his hand and she looked completely happy, the guard said, clearly expecting me to snap and start smashing furniture in the kitchen. I carefully pushed Akiko's plate to the edge of the table. The pain of betrayal tried to break through, but I locked it in the farthest corner of my mind. There was no wife for me anymore. There was Object A, who had just violated the basic contract of trust, and there was Object B, who had provided the resources for it. "Thank you, Taro." "I owe you," I answered calmly, looking at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. My face remained absolutely still and unfamiliar. "What are you going to do? Are you coming here? I can take you through the back entrance," my friend offered, ready to risk his job for my family drama. "No, do not attract attention, just watch them. Most importantly, preserve the security camera recordings from tonight. I will contact you later." At the same time, quiet jazz was playing on the 3rd floor of Oasis. The air smelled of expensive sandalwood, rare whiskey, and absolute impunity. Akiko sat on a leather sofa, enjoying the weight of the diamond bracelet on her wrist. Satoshi Yamamoto had just put it on her himself and called her special. She looked at the panoramic view of nighttime Tokyo and felt that she had finally arrived where she belonged. The city below seemed small, gray, and completely unimportant. Satoshi poured champagne into a crystal glass for her. His movements were confident and commanding. He did not ask for permission. He simply took what he considered his by right. "Does your husband ask unnecessary questions?" the billionaire asked with a smirk, looking at her over the rim of his glass. There was not a drop of concern in his voice, only lazy curiosity. Akiko twisted her lips in contempt, remembering my hunched back and cheap office suit. "Kenji? He's too boring and predictable to notice anything." Satoshi smiled with satisfaction, appreciating her ambition. To him, she was just another beautiful investment. But Akiko sincerely believed she had caught luck by the tail. She took a sip of champagne, erasing 5 years of our marriage from her memory. In that luxurious room, there was simply no place or meaning left for me. I turned off the microwave and leaned my back against the cold wall. Taro's words were still echoing in my head, but they only confirmed what I had been noticing for a long time. Akiko's betrayal was not a spontaneous mistake. It was the logical result of her growing contempt. I remembered our dinner 3 days earlier when everything had become crystal clear. She had thrown a glossy magazine onto the table with a photo of a new residential complex in Ginza. Her eyes burned with a hungry, aggressive light when she looked at me. "My friend Yumi just moved there, and we are still renting this box," Akiko hissed, glancing with disgust around our clean but modest living room. I calmly answered that our income did not yet allow such spending, and suggested discussing next year's budget. Her reaction felt like a slap across the face. "Budget? Kenji, you are planning poverty. You are just a salaryman without a drop of ambition. Next to you, I feel my youth disappearing into nowhere." That evening, I stayed silent. I thought my care and stability mattered to her. I honestly believed I had chosen the right quiet life after long years of chaos. How wrong I was. My attempt to become an ordinary man had turned into being wiped on like a doormat. Akiko did not need loyalty. She needed status. I closed my eyes and allowed myself one last second of weakness. In my mind, I buried the illusion of the family I'd worked so hard to build. My quiet harbor had been fake. When I opened my eyes, there was no warmth left inside me. Only dry, mathematical calculation remained. The system Akiko wanted so badly to enter required a thorough inspection. The sound of a key turning in the lock came exactly at 1 a.m. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, pretending to prepare a boring report for my company. The door opened, and Akiko stepped into the hall. With her came the thick, suffocating smell of expensive men's perfume and elite alcohol. She looked slightly disheveled, but her eyes shone with a strange, nervous triumph. She did not expect to see me awake and froze for a second at the doorway. "Are you still awake?" she asked, quickly hiding her left hand with the new bracelet behind her back. Her voice trembled, betraying the mild panic of an imperfect liar. I did not lift my eyes from the laptop screen. My fingers kept tapping rhythmically on the keyboard. "A lot of work. How did the report go? Did you submit everything on time?" She exhaled, deciding that I had noticed nothing. "Yes, it was a terrible evening. The boss made us redo the spreadsheets 3 times. I am falling apart from exhaustion. Every word was recorded and filed into my mental dossier. She lied so easily, so confidently, that it almost inspired pure professional admiration. Your dinner is on the table." I did not put it away, I said in an even tone. Closing the laptop, my face remained the friendly mask of a boring, caring husband. Akiko grimaced, glancing at the cold rice. "I'm not hungry. We had a snack at the office while working. I will just shower and go to bed." "Please do not make noise." She walked past me, trying to keep enough distance so I would not smell another man on her. But I did not need to smell anything. I already knew the truth. I watched her go. Her walk had acquired a new arrogant lightness. She moved through my apartment as if she were already inside her billionaire's penthouse. Water began rushing in the bathroom, washing away the traces of her betrayal. Akiko thought she controlled the situation. She was sure I was too stupid and too busy with spreadsheets to understand. She saw me as a grazing animal that could be kept safely inside a pen while she hunted through Tokyo's elite jungle. That was her most fatal mistake. In the high-stakes world I had left 5 years earlier, people that self-assured were eaten first. They always left trails, blinded by their own greatness. I gathered the dishes from the table and carefully threw her dinner into the trash. My movements were precise and measured. I no longer felt pain or disappointment, only a cold, pulsing need to restore order. The Yamamoto system was dirty. My wife had become part of that dirt. That meant the whole structure had to be demolished. I entered my dark office and closed the door tightly. The only light came from the smartphone screen. I opened the gallery and found the folder named Family. For a normal person, that would have been a moment of painful farewell. People look at such photos for hours, cry, get drunk, and try to find the reason love collapsed. But I was not a normal person. I was a level 0 crisis negotiator. My task had always been to cut off infected assets in order to save the structure. I pressed select all. A warning appeared on the screen about the permanent deletion of hundreds of files. No backup, no way back. My finger touched confirmation without the slightest hesitation. The screen froze for a second, then the folder disappeared, leaving perfectly empty digital space behind. I methodically deleted 5 years of messages, erased shared notes, and cleared the calendar of common plans. I destroyed our history quickly and ruthlessly. For the plan to work, I had to become absolutely invulnerable. Any emotion or nostalgia for my wife could become the crack through which the enemy would strike. Akiko was no longer my partner. From that minute, she had the status of an accomplice whose actions had to be documented and used in the case. Satoshi Yamamoto thought he was buying a beautiful toy protected by non-disclosure agreements and his limitless bank account. He did not know whom he had let into his world. I placed the phone on the desk and opened the bottom drawer. Under a stack of old tax declarations lay a second, plain button phone, switched off 5 years earlier. I took it out, blew off a thin layer of dust, and pressed the power button. The battery was dead. I connected the charger and waited for the old mechanism to wake up. This phone was my only bridge to the past, to the world where problems were solved not with kitchen scandals, but with massive informational and financial strikes. The screen glowed faintly as it found a network signal. There was only one saved number on the device. A man I had once helped avoid a major prison sentence. It was 2 a.m. Normal lawyers are asleep at that hour, or drinking in expensive Ginza bars. But Hiroshi had never been a normal lawyer. He was a systemic predator. I pressed call. The rings lasted painfully long. I could almost physically feel the cozy shell of an ordinary office clerk tearing apart and revealing old armor underneath. On the 5th ring, the call connected. Quiet music played in the background, and I heard ice clink in a glass. Hiroshi did not speak first. He always checked who was breathing on the line. "Hiroshi-san," I said in my real hard voice, the one Akiko had never heard in her life. That voice cut through the silence of my dark office. There was a long pause on the other end. I heard the ice stop moving. The lawyer recognized the intonation of a man who had been silent for 5 calm years. "Tanaka, you promised never to use this number again," Hiroshi said cautiously, with a mix of professional interest and carefully hidden concern. "My circumstances have changed radically. My vacation is over." "Hiroshi, and I will need your services very soon. Was someone killed? Does someone need to be pulled out of a pit?" The lawyer moved straight to the point, understanding that no one called that number for simple real estate consultations. Worse, someone decided they could take what is mine with impunity and use it in their dirty schemes. I need the best financial audit specialist. Right now. "Financial audit? Are you going to destroy someone's company, Tanaka? Who is the target? Give me a name so I can at least understand the level of approaching disaster." I looked at the wedding photograph still standing in a frame on my desk. Tomorrow morning I would throw it in the trash. The emotional anchor was fully detached. Satoshi Yamamoto. Yamamoto Corporation. I need a complete map of his offshore accounts and shell contracts. I said his name as casually as if ordering food delivery. Hiroshi choked on his whiskey. "Yamamoto? Kenji, you have lost your mind. He has an army of lawyers and connections in government. If he notices surveillance, he will crush us like insects. He will not notice, Hiroshi. He is too busy with his own exceptional status and the purchase of new toys. He does not look under his feet. They did not understand that they had placed the first key to their destruction directly in my hands. The affair was not just a personal insult. It became a legal entry point into the system. If Satoshi gives her expensive jewelry and transfers assets, he leaves a financial trail. In his world, nothing is done for free. Every gift has to be accounted for. Assemble a team, Hiroshi. I need a forensic auditor who will find holes in his tax returns. And a private detective from former investigators. Price does not matter. The lawyer stayed silent for a few seconds, weighing the risks. Then I heard him close his laptop on the other end. Old instincts had defeated fear. "Tomorrow at 8 p.m, the Refuge Bar in Shinjuku. Come alone and make sure no one is following you," Hiroshi answered shortly, accepting the rules of my game. Agreed. I hung up and looked at the black phone screen. Preparation was complete. The flywheel of the hidden audit had started, and no one could stop it now. I heard the bedroom door close. Akiko lay down in our bed, confident in her brilliant future. She fell asleep thinking of luxury, not suspecting the storm coming toward her. She wanted a status life. She wanted to belong to high society. Fine, I would give her publicity. But she was unlikely to enjoy the role I had prepared for her in the finale. Yamamoto saw himself as the king of Tokyo and my wife as a convenient pawn. But a player had entered that chessboard whom they did not even seat, and my first move had already been made. I switched off the office light and dissolved into the darkness. In the morning, Kenji Tanaka would put the mask of a boring clerk back on, but the real me had already begun the hunt. The half-basement bar in Shinjuku smelled of old wood, expensive tobacco, and strong whiskey. I went down the creaking steps for the first time in 5 years. The room was almost empty. I immediately saw a familiar back at the far counter. The best corporate lawyer in the city sat alone, staring into his glass. Hiroshi looked like a tired man, someone who had long forgotten why he earned enormous fees and won hopeless court cases. I came closer, sat on the next stool, and silently placed a thick folder on the dark wood of the counter. The bartender immediately moved away without asking questions. Hiroshi slowly turned his head. At first, there was only irritation in his cloudy eyes. Then his focus sharpened. He finally recognized me. His hand with the glass froze halfway to his lips. He had not seen me since the major case, after which I disappeared into the shadows forever and chose a quiet life. Hiroshi did not know me as an ordinary husband working in a dull office. He remembered me as a level 0 negotiator who knew how to destroy systems. The lawyer lowered his eyes to the folder. I saw his shoulders tense instantly. On the black cover, only one short name was embossed in gold, a name that absolutely everyone in corporate Tokyo knew. Hiroshi read Satoshi Yamamoto and exhaled quietly, placing his glass back on the table. In his uneven breathing, professional legal excitement mixed with a very understandable human fear of the billionaire's true, limitless power. I looked at him with a perfectly steady gaze. I did not need just a lawyer for a dirty divorce. I needed a surgeon with a license. Hiroshi moved the whiskey aside and pulled the folder toward himself. He quietly asked whether I understood what I was getting into. An attack on Yamamoto Corporation meant a one-way ticket. I calmly answered that it was not an attack. It was full sanitation of infected territory. I needed the best specialist in hidden offshore assets. Hiroshi gave a crooked smile and shook his head. He said the old Kenji had finally returned to business. Then he named only one short name, Mickey. Late that night, we were already sitting in his empty glass office high above the city. On the table lay the first diagrams and bank statements I had managed to collect. Hiroshi leafed through the papers with growing confusion. He looked up and said the situation looked like an ordinary affair by a rich idiot. In his opinion, the wife was simply cheating and the lover was giving her expensive toys. He called it a standard story that was not worth destroying a corporation over. I shook my head dryly. Rich people do not record gifts through subsidiary companies under such complex legal cover. There was an entirely different calculation here. Hiroshi rubbed his forehead. He reminded me that Satoshi had an army of first-class attorneys. Any direct moral damages lawsuit would be trampled in a couple of hearings. I answered that I was not going to sue for compensation. I did not need Satoshi's dirty money at all. I was going to prove that all of his money was illegal. The lawyer leaned back in his leather chair. He finally understood my logic. If we struck at his personal life, Satoshi would pay and walk away clean. But if we struck at taxes and fraud, he would lose status, power, and freedom. We agreed on a fee that consumed almost all my modest savings. In cases like this, one cannot save money on instruments. I ordered him to prepare all the papers for my divorce. The divorce had to be absolutely clean and fast. I would make no property claims against Akiko. Hiroshi was surprised, but I explained that this fictional defeat would become our perfect shield. In the morning, I sat in the kitchen of our cramped apartment. Akiko came out of the bedroom, getting ready for work. She wore a new suit from a famous designer. The outfit clearly cost more than several months of my salary. She threw me an irritated look while fixing her hair in the hall mirror. In her eyes, I was just dull decoration. A stain against the bright and wealthy life she now deserved, thanks to her new status. Akiko poured coffee and muttered through her teeth that I was sitting around uselessly again. She said normal men build careers instead of drinking morning tea. I calmly agreed with her. There was no point arguing. Every arrogant word she spoke now was only proof that my plan was justified. She adjusted the thin diamond necklace on her neck. I recognized the exclusive brand immediately. It cost a fortune and did not fit her income in any way. Akiko noticed my assessing glance. She declared arrogantly that it was a generous gift from her friend Yumi for her recent promotion at the boring job. The lie slipped from her lips too easily and too naturally. I mentally recorded the approximate value of the necklace. The jewelry would soon become an excellent hook for the audit. She placed the empty cup in the sink and casually said that we would need to have a serious talk over the weekend. I knew perfectly well what that conversation would be about. She was preparing to erase me from her life. I nodded and answered that I was also thinking about our future. Akiko snorted condescendingly and took her bag. She slammed the front door loudly, leaving me alone. Her footsteps faded on the stairs. I took out my phone and quickly sent Hiroshi a short message. The text was simple. Object is preparing for an official breakup. We must accelerate team assembly immediately. We have very little time left for preparation. That afternoon, we met Mickey in a rented office without signs or a name. She looked like an ordinary student coming to a part-time job after classes. But her reputation as a ruthless financial investigator spoke for itself. Mickey looked at me with obvious and undisguised professional skepticism. She was used to working with major multinational banks. In front of her now sat an ordinary office employee in an inexpensive and slightly wrinkled suit. I did not waste time on long, polite introductions. I placed the contract in front of her immediately and named the initial advance for her specific services. Mickey's eyes widened slightly. I said I needed a complete, deep audit of 3 specific subsidiaries of the enormous Yamamoto Corporation. I needed to know exactly how they processed non-target expenses. Mickey took the papers, ran her sharp eyes over them, and smiled. She lazily answered that Satoshi hid money through a complex chain of nominees and charitable foundations. It was classic protection for large capital. Mickey tried to explain how technically difficult it was to penetrate the defenses of such elite structures. I interrupted her mid-sentence without raising my voice. I simply named 3 specific offshore zones and 2 account numbers I had already calculated myself. The skepticism on the young auditor's face vanished instantly. She understood that I knew money laundering mechanisms better than half of her former high-ranking bosses at the National Tax Authority. Mickey pulled the contract toward herself and signed without looking. Her precise movements acquired the hard professional grip of a predator that had smelled prey. She promised to dig out every transaction and every hidden transfer. I left her working with the data and stepped out into the busy street under the cold wind. My hidden team of ghosts was fully assembled. Now I needed direct documentary proof of what exactly was happening in the deepest shadow. The private detective called me closer to evening. He was a former police investigator who had lost his position because of his stubborn and inconvenient principles. His covert surveillance skills remained flawless. He reported dryly that he was following Satoshi's car from the corporation office through evening traffic. The billionaire had gone not to his elite private club, but to a very expensive restaurant in Ginza, and he had come there absolutely not to meet my arrogant wife. I asked for details. The detective said Satoshi was meeting a young woman. She looked like a typical socialite and behaved with extreme confidence. Several clear, high-resolution photos arrived on my secure phone. I enlarged the image, studying the familiar features. It was Yumi, Akiko's best and closest friend, the same woman who had so often visited our home and given my wife advice about style and life. In those spy photos, Yumi and Satoshi did not look like secret lovers at all. They sat over printed pages with serious faces. Satoshi handed her a thick white envelope across the table, very much like a generous fee for completed work. Yumi put it into her bag with a professional smile. The detective added that he had managed to overhear part of their conversation. They were discussing a completely new girl. They were evaluating her appearance and degree of trustfulness. I felt the scattered elements of this criminal puzzle snap into their rightful places in my cold mind. Yumi had never been just a caring friend. She officially worked for Satoshi. She was his personal recruiter for specific criminal needs. Yumi found suitable women hungry for status and methodically pulled them into the billionaire's orbit, receiving solid commissions for it. I ordered the detective to keep Yumi under round-the-clock surveillance. She had suddenly become the weakest and most vulnerable link in the entire chain. Through her contacts and accounts, we could reach Satoshi's dirtiest financial secrets. The detective confirmed the order and immediately ended the call. I looked again at the clear photograph of Yumi. This two-faced woman had spent months persuading Akiko to leave me for a fairy tale life. Now I knew exactly what she was worth. The next day, the 3 of us gathered again in the hidden office. Mickey sat before 3 large monitors, surrounded by empty paper cups. She turned to me with a tired but absolutely triumphant expression. Mickey confidently stated that Satoshi's financial system was far from flawless. She had broken through the first layer of reporting and found a massive systemic hole. Hiroshi came closer to the glowing screens, adjusting his tie with tense hands. Mickey brought a complex color-coded payment scheme onto the central monitor. All those luxurious gifts, apartments, and new cars for naive women were not generosity. Satoshi processed them through accounting as expensive consulting services, using fictitious contracts with shell advertising agencies. Every woman who entered his network, including my wife Akiko, had to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement, a standard commercial NDA. But it was not just a legal silence agreement. The clauses had been masterfully woven in to make those women financially responsible for all transfers. Hiroshi whistled quietly through his teeth. He said the solution was brilliant and monstrous at the same time. Satoshi did not risk his own money at all. The billionaire had effectively turned his many lovers into living legal buffers for dirty money. If the tax office started digging, they would answer. Mickey added the most important link. Satoshi systematically evaded corporate taxes on colossal sums by writing off his entertainment as business expenses. I silently looked at the long rows of dry figures on the screen. Akiko truly thought she had found a powerful man with real status and limitless influence. She sincerely believed she had become his chosen queen, the woman for whom he was ready to lay the world at her feet. And she despised me for being ordinary. But to Satoshi, she was only consumable material, a foolish pawn in a large-scale money laundering scheme. She had signed the documents that destroyed her future herself, and when the National Tax Authority came for him, she would inevitably sink with his corporation, left with enormous debts to the state. Hiroshi looked at me nervously and asked what we would do with all of this. There was not yet enough direct proof for a crushing blow against the empire. The lawyer suggested using the schemes as excellent material for profitable blackmail. Satoshi would pay any amount to make us quietly destroy the files. I looked at him with icy eyes and answered dryly that we would blackmail no one. This game was not for compensation. We would continue the deep audit. We would gather data until we had the entire structure of his network down to the last yen. We would drive him into a corner from which no connection could save him. Mickey nodded with satisfaction and turned back to her keyboard. At that moment, the detective sent me a new text message about Yumi's evening movements. The quiet and invisible audit machine of Yamamoto Corporation was now running at full power. Every careless step they took was being meticulously recorded in my dossier. Satoshi was probably feeling like an invincible ruler of the world in his luxurious penthouse. He was celebrating another false victory over the law. He did not suspect that his high position and greed had already started methodically destroying the foundation of his status. I only waited for the moment to bring the match. The glass doors of the conference room reflected a perfect picture. Akiko sat in a leather chair with one leg crossed over the other, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. Her expensive lawyer arranged papers on the table, papers meant to destroy my life. I watched them through the glass and felt only cold calculation. A week earlier, I would have entered with my heart pounding. I would have tried to find even a drop of sympathy in her eyes, or a trace of the person I once loved. Now the woman in front of me was simply Object A, a participant in a money laundering case, preparing to make the biggest legal mistake of her life. Akiko caught my gaze through the glass. She did not look away. She smiled slowly and deliberately, displaying class superiority and extreme boredom with her entire posture. She was waiting for drama, waiting for me to cling to our ruined marriage, beg her to stay, or at least cause a scandal to preserve masculine pride. Her new status required a beautiful victory over the former loser. She needed to crush me in order to fully justify her choice in favor of someone else's dirty money. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped into the conference room. The air inside was filled with the smell of her expensive perfume, bought with money stolen from the tax service. Akiko's lawyer, a man with flawless hair and a contemptuous gaze, did not even rise to greet me. He only nodded carelessly toward the empty chair opposite them. My own lawyer, provided by Hiroshi's firm as cover, sat beside me. He looked like a tired novice, playing his role perfectly in our performance. Akiko leaned back in the chair. She wore a suit from the latest collection, shouting that she belonged to another world, a world where I no longer existed. She crossed her arms and looked at me as if I were a dirty stain on her new carpet. It was the look of a queen lowering herself to speak with a beggar slave. I calmly took a cheap plastic pen from the inside pocket of my jacket and placed it in front of me. The gesture caused Akiko's lawyer to smile with perfect condescension. "Mr. Tanaka, let us not waste our valuable time. My client wants to finish this process as quickly as possible and without unnecessary foolish sentiment." The lawyer pushed a thick folder toward me. Every page had been designed to deprive me of any rights to our shared property, including the apartment and joint accounts. The agreement was a masterpiece of legal arrogance. They even included a waiver of claims to the jewelry Satoshi had bought her, under the cover of corporate gifts. Akiko leaned forward without taking her eyes off me. She was clearly waiting for me to protest, shout about injustice, or hysterically demand my lawful half of the assets. I looked at the folder without changing expression. My pulse stayed even. My breathing did not falter for a second. Only a cold, analytical algorithm worked inside me. Do you understand the essence of the demands? My client takes the property and also requires a complete waiver of claims to any valuable gifts received during the marriage. I noticed her lawyer's hand twitch nervously. They expected to exhaust me through long negotiations and then force me to accept even more humiliating terms. The lawyer made a theatrical pause, waiting for my reaction. Akiko bit her lip slightly, anticipating the moment of my complete public humiliation inside that luxurious conference room. She thought she was taking the last thing I had. She did not know that the apartment was already under the tax inspection's attention because of her fictitious consulting contracts. I moved my gaze from the lawyer to Akiko. Her eyes shone with hunger for power. She was intoxicated by her impunity, certain that Satoshi's money made her untouchable. Mr. Tanaka, if you try to challenge these terms in court, we will crush you financially. The process will drag on for years, and you will lose even the little you still have. My cover lawyer opened the first page for show and began quietly murmuring about the unfairness of the terms. Akiko rolled her eyes, demonstrating extreme irritation. I stopped my lawyer with a gesture. The silence in the room became almost physical. Akiko straightened, preparing to deliver the final verbal strike before my capitulation. I did not read the document. I did not flip through the pages to check the fine print. I simply removed the cap from my cheap pen and slowly pulled the folder toward myself. My finger confidently turned the document to the very last page, where the signature line waited. I did not ask a single question about the terms of this open robbery. I agree to everything. Where exactly do I sign so this can end faster? My voice sounded as ordinary as if I were ordering coffee in a cheap diner. The lawyer's face stretched. He opened his mouth to deliver another prepared threat, but the words stuck in his throat. He clearly had not written this scenario in advance. Akiko jerked forward, almost knocking over a glass of water. Her perfect mask of arrogance cracked. She looked at me as if I had suddenly gone completely insane. "What are you doing?" She broke first. Her voice trembled, losing its contemptuous color. She could not believe I was surrendering without the slightest resistance or long argument. "Signing the papers, as you asked? Is that not why we gathered here today?" I placed the first clear signature on the main agreement and confidently turned to the appendix. "You did not even read them. It says you leave with nothing. You remain on the street, Kenji. Do you understand what you are giving up?" Her tone suddenly became loud and sharp. "I understand perfectly what I am giving up, Akiko." I signed the second page and carefully capped the pen. A toxic asset that no longer brings me anything but losses. She recoiled as if I had struck her face. My absolute obedience hit her pride harder than any scandal. I did not let her enjoy the long-awaited victory. In her picture of the world, I was supposed to writhe in pain, acknowledge her superiority, and envy her. My indifference turned her great triumph into an empty paper formality. I pushed the folder back to her stunned lawyer. "Please check whether all seals are in place. I still have many important work tasks today." I slowly rose from the chair. "Wait." Akiko also jumped up. Her hands were clenched into fists, and red spots appeared on her cheekbones. She was not going to let me leave without her dose of cheap dopamine. She was used to me smoothing over every conflict. She took my flexibility in marriage for weakness. Now she tried to strike that weakness with all her cruelty. "Do you think you can just walk away, pretending to be proud? You were always a pathetic coward, Kenji. Even now, you do not have the courage to fight for your own future." I stopped at the door and slowly turned around. My face remained a blank sheet. I could see how much it enraged her that her miserable insults could not pierce my armor. "You will not even ask how long it lasted?" Her voice became quieter, but poison rang in it. She wanted to tell me dirty details. She wanted to bite into my heart with the story of her affairs. She waited for me to break in and ask, to show vulnerability, but I did not need to ask. Thanks to the detective, I knew the schedule of her betrayals better than she remembered it herself. Why should I know what no longer matters? I looked directly into her eyes without blinking. "The past stays in this room. I am interested only in my clean and peaceful future." That was a lie. I was interested in the complete liquidation of her new master's empire. But to Akiko, the phrase sounded like a final sentence against her feminine appeal and importance. "I am leaving for a man who can buy your whole life with one check. He gives me what you could never give. I am finally becoming someone truly significant in this city." She almost screamed it, desperately trying to provoke jealousy or anger in me. Her expensive lawyer coughed awkwardly, understanding that his client looked extremely unprofessional. Satoshi Yamamoto is a very respected man, Kenji, and you will remain nobody. An ordinary gray clerk in a cheap suit who simply gives up at the first serious difficulty. I looked at her face twisted with malice and thought about Mickey's folder, about the shell firms in the Cayman Islands through which Satoshi was turning this woman into his disposable legal buffer. Are you finished? My tone was so even and bored that Akiko choked with outrage. She had clearly prepared that speech for several days, and I swept it away like dust from a table. I do not care whom you go to or whose checks you now cash. You got your documents. Good luck in your new significant life. You will need it very soon. I did not wait for her answer. I simply left the conference room, leaving her alone with her ruined triumph. The air in the hallway felt surprisingly clean and fresh. No one screamed, no one threw objects, but in that quiet room, I had delivered the first real blow. I showed her that her new social status meant absolutely nothing to me. The elevator doors closed, cutting me off from my past life. My fictional lawyer stood beside me, nervously polishing his glasses. He clearly understood nothing, and that was for the best. As the cabin descended smoothly to the first floor, I took out my phone. A message from Mickey glowed on the screen. Financial data confirmed. Object has assumed all risks. Meanwhile, on the 15th floor, Akiko remained standing in the middle of the conference room. Her lawyer silently collected the signed papers, trying not to look again at his furious client. Instead of absolute freedom and victory, Akiko felt a strange, hollow emptiness. My indifference had robbed her action of all meaning. Who needs status if the former husband refuses to recognize it? With trembling hands, she took out her smartphone and called Yumi. She urgently needed confirmation that she was right. She needed someone to say she had done everything perfectly. Yumi masterfully played psychologist for rich fools. Her task was to keep Akiko on a short leash of flattery while Satoshi used her name in his dirty business. Yumi answered softly, with light restaurant music in the background. Well, how did it go, darling? Did you smear that bore against the wall? He probably cried and begged forgiveness for his weakness and mistakes. Akiko swallowed the lump rising in her throat. He did not even argue. He just signed everything and left, Yumi. He looked at me as if I was nothing. I am shaking from his unbelievable nerve. Yumi's patronizing laugh sounded through the phone. Oh, Akiko, do not be stupid. It is classic male pride. He is only pretending to be a hero to hide his complete worthlessness in life. Listen to me carefully, Akiko, Yumi said in a stricter tone. You are now a woman of status. Men like Tanaka will always try to sting you at the end. It is a loser defense mechanism. He is a real bankrupt, darling. And you have dinner tonight with one of the most influential men in Tokyo. Satoshi-san has prepared an incredible surprise for you. Forget that loser forever. Her best friend's words work like good painkillers. Akiko straightened her back and breathed deeply. Yes, Yumi was absolutely right. He was simply jealous. She was free for a beautiful and luxurious life. 40 minutes later, I was already in our team's secret office. The wallboard was covered with transaction schemes, photos of offshore accounts, and copies of Satoshi's shell contracts. Mickey sat at the monitors, surrounded by empty cups from strong coffee. Her fingers flew over the keyboard with incredible speed. She was a genius of digital financial forensics. The divorce is officially complete, I said, throwing my copy of the documents onto the table. They did not even try to hide their enormous appetite. She took every asset recorded under our joint name. Mickey smiled without looking away from the glowing screen. That is the best thing that could have happened, Tanaka-san. You are now officially cut off from all her financial flows. You are absolutely clean before the law. She displayed a copy of the agreement on the main screen. The document Akiko proudly considered proof of her victory. I looked at that piece of paper and saw a perfect legal trap for my former wife. Akiko thinks she took property. In reality, she has just taken full financial responsibility for the illegal shares Satoshi transferred to her personal bank accounts. Mickey placed a detailed tax statement beside it. Satoshi used her for years as a trash bin for his gray assets. And now you carry no responsibility for that dirty trash. My former marriage had officially become a convenient money laundering instrument. And my former wife had just signed, with her own hand, that all those dirty assets belonged exclusively to her. How did she react to your icy calm? Mickey finally turned to me. Her eyes shone with professional excitement. She understood the beauty of this ruthless chess game. She was furious. I went to the board and pinned Akiko's photo to the center of the scheme, right below Satoshi's photo. She is so blinded by status that she does not notice the collar being placed around her neck. She sincerely believes she has become the chosen woman of a billionaire. She does not understand that real kings do not transfer toxic debts to queens. They transfer them to cheap disposable material. Mickey nodded and made a new note in her work notebook. Then we can move to the next important phase. We need to track exactly how Yumi recruits new victims for this scheme. I looked at the diagram, feeling the last remnants of human compassion for Akiko freeze completely inside me. She had made her choice. My ruthless audit would be completed in full.
Remember this, the sweetest moment for an enemy is when he thinks you have lost. That is exactly when he takes the toxic asset into his own hands.
A message from Akiko came 20 minutes after Yumi's call. She ordered me to come to a restaurant in Ginza and pick up the last apartment papers. The tone was not a request. It was an order. My former wife had already tried on the role of a high society woman and spoke to me like service staff. I put on my plain gray suit and went there by subway. For people like Satoshi, that appearance was perfect bait for their sense of superiority. The restaurant occupied the top floor of a glass tower. At the entrance stood a host who studied my suit and immediately decided I had come to the wrong floor. When I gave Akiko's surname, his face changed. He understood that I was not a guest, but part of someone else's drama, a drama scheduled to be shown over dinner. Akiko sat by the window beside Yumi. She wore a new champagne-colored dress and the smile of a woman who had come to watch someone else fall. Satoshi Yamamoto appeared a minute later. He did not enter the room so much as occupy it. The waiters straightened their backs, and nearby guests lowered their whispers. He looked me up and down and did not bother hiding his boredom. To him, I was not Akiko's former husband. I was old furniture that no one had yet carried out. "So this is Kenji?" he asked without offering his hand. I expected someone more dramatic after all the talk about a ruined marriage. Akiko laughed softly. The laugh was too loud for a proper restaurant, but she wanted the neighboring tables to hear how insignificant I was. I sat opposite them without invitation. Yumi smiled gently and tilted her head, portraying sympathy so carefully that it looked rehearsed before a mirror. "Kenji, do not take everything to heart," she said. "Sometimes people simply outgrow each other. Akiko has finally found a man on her level." Her voice was warm, almost caring. That is how people speak when they hold a knife behind their back and are very proud that the blade is still invisible. Satoshi signaled the waiter. Wine appeared on the table, worth enough to pay a month of my old rent. He poured Akiko's glass first. "Let us drink to a new life," he said lazily, "and to the fact that the past sometimes understands on its own when it is time to go into the trash." Akiko looked at me over the rim of the glass. She waited for me to flinch. I simply took a glass of water and had a small sip. At that moment, the waiter brought a folder with documents. On the top sheet lay the apartment transfer agreement and confirmation of my waiver of claims. Satoshi tapped the folder with his finger. His ring struck the table as if he were stamping my social death, and neighboring tables saw it. "Sign calmly, Tanaka-san. We are all adults. You receive freedom, Akiko receives a future, and I receive silence." "Silence is expensive," I answered, "especially when it is bought through corporate cards, other people's signatures, and overly confident waiters." Satoshi's smile thinned. He did not understand how much I knew, but for the first time that evening his eyes paused on me, not as furniture. Yumi quickly intervened, placing a hand on Akiko's wrist. "Kenji is just nervous." "Do not mind him, Satoshi-san. He always speaks strangely under pressure." Akiko eagerly accepted that explanation. It was easier for her to see me as a humiliated loser than to admit that my calm had a reason. I signed the papers with one straight line and placed the pen beside the folder. The next table noticed the gesture, but didn't understand it was witnessing a trap. Satoshi clearly decided to finish the scene. He called the waiter and loudly asked for the bill. Then he took out a black Yamamoto Holdings corporate card. "Allow me to pay for your last dinner as a husband," he said. "Consider it charity for people who choose careers poorly." Several guests turned their heads. Akiko glowed because the gesture seemed to her the final proof of my worthlessness. I did not argue. On the contrary, I asked the waiter to bring a paper receipt with the full payer name. Satoshi laughed. deciding I wanted to keep a souvenir. Give him the receipt, he told the waiter. Let him hang it on his wall at home and remember what real power looks like in another man's hands. The waiter brought the folder. On the receipt stood not Satoshi's personal name, but the name of the subsidiary, Sakura Media Consulting, with the note representative expenses. I carefully folded the receipt and placed it in the inner pocket of my jacket. It was not a souvenir. It was the first public thread from personal humiliation to corporate scheme. Yumi noticed my gesture and stopped smiling for a second. Her eyes slid towards Satoshi, but the billionaire was already looking at Akiko again. Tomorrow you will sign the papers for the new shares, he told her. Yumi will explain where to sign. Do not waste your head on boring details. Akiko nodded with delight. To her, the word shares sounded like a door into the elite. To me, it sounded like the click of a trap around her own leg. I rose from the table. Satoshi did not even look toward me. He had already decided he had bought my silence with a plate of expensive food and borrowed contempt. At the exit, the host no longer looked at me with disdain. He had seen me humiliated at the billionaire's table, so he looked away first. I stepped into the cold evening air and photographed the receipt under a street lamp. The document came out clear, with the company name and time of payment. Through a secure channel, I sent the image to Mickey. A minute later came her reply. That company was already in our scheme, but we lacked a live transaction. I looked at the glowing top floor of the restaurant. There, Akiko, Yumi, and Satoshi were still celebrating. They thought the evening was a beautiful victory over the poor ex-husband. In reality, they had just carried out a corporate expense in front of a dozen witnesses, tying a personal affair, a fictitious company, and my divorce documents into one chain. Mickey sent one more message. If Akiko signed the new shares tomorrow, we could connect gifts, restaurant, an offshore network into a single chain. I put the phone in my pocket. I had just been publicly humiliated in an expensive restaurant, and that humiliation had become the first proof that could not be dismissed as rumor. When I reached the subway station, the phone vibrated again. It was a message from Akiko. Do not even think about ruining my life with your pathetic resentment. I looked at the phrase for a long time and almost smiled for the first time that evening. She still thought this was about feelings, not documents. I answered with one word, understood. Then I locked the screen and went down into the subway, where no one knew that beside them rode a man carrying a receipt for a future collapse. Satoshi wanted to show me my place. He did it brilliantly. The place was simply not at their table, but at the entrance to the system I now saw from the inside. Yumi watched me from the restaurant window. Her smile returned, but her fingers were already gripping the phone too tightly. The White Lotus felt cold for the first time. An hour later, the detective confirmed that Yumi left the restaurant separately and almost immediately called an unknown number. The conversation lasted less than a minute. She said only one thing. The ex-husband is strange. Check him. That was enough. The enemies had noticed a shadow, but had not yet understood from which side the blow was coming. At the apartment, I placed the receipt on the table beside the divorce papers and understood that the evening had given me more than a month of hidden surveillance and dozens of cautious guesses. 20 minutes after my message, Mickey sent a short alarm signal. Yumi was not simply frightened. She had begun cleaning her trails too fast. The detective was already following her phone through legal billing marks and street cameras. After the restaurant, she did not go home, but turned toward a private co-working space in Akasaka. That is how people act when they feel danger, but do not yet know where it comes from. They run not to friends, but to archives, money, and emergency exits. Inside the co-working space, Yumi rented a room under someone else's name and took out a second laptop. The detective did not follow her inside. The corridor camera and arrival time were enough. 10 minutes later, Mickey caught the first strange signal. One of Yumi's wallets linked to an elite personnel agency attempted to urgently withdraw a large sum. It was not escape. It was panic packed into a financial transaction. Yumi realized the restaurant receipt could become the beginning of a chain and decided to save herself first. I told Mickey not to block the transfer. A frightened rat has to run through all the tunnels before we close the exits and show the map to those who come with a warrant. The money went to the account of a small firm officially engaged in storing digital archives. No hacking, no guesswork, just a clean banking trail with Yumi's signature. Mickey laughed softly in my earpiece. She said Yumi had shown us herself where she kept the files on girls, contracts, payments, and Satoshi's personal instructions. An hour later, the detective sent a new photo. Yumi was leaving the co-working space holding her phone with both hands, looking not like a social lady, but like a person before a search. She called Akiko almost immediately. I did not hear the words, but I saw the result. A minute later, my former wife sent me a message demanding that I stay out of her new life. That was Yumi's usual scheme. First, she stroked the victim's head, then directed her anger where the client needed it. This time, the arrow was turned toward me. I did not answer Akiko. Instead, Hiroshi sent Yumi a careful business offer through a front intermediary to buy her old client archive. The intermediary did not threaten or pressure her. He merely hinted that some people were willing to pay more for silence than Satoshi paid for loyalty. Yumi took the bait faster than I expected. Through a protected channel, she sent a sample file, 3 names, transfer amounts, and notes on which girls had already signed NDAs. There were no emotions, jealousy, or gossip in those lines. Only a commodity table, age, weakness, greed level, necessary gift amount, and leak risk. Mickey went silent for several seconds. Then she said such a sample was enough to link Yumi to recruitment and Satoshi to payment for every woman brought in. But I did not need a sample. I needed Yumi to admit the value of the archive herself and name Satoshi as the main client, with no way to retreat later. Hiroshi dictated the second message to the intermediary. If the archive was real, the buyer required confirmation that the materials were collected on behalf of Yamamoto Holdings. Yumi paused for almost 7 minutes. Then she sent a short answer worth more than any spy camera. All orders came through Satoshi's personal office. Then she added a phrase that made even Hiroshi swear quietly. If the deal fell through, she would send copies to the press and drown all his girls with herself. That was when the white lotus finally shed its petals. Under Yumi's soft smile hid not a friend and not a victim, but a small predator storing knives for everyone around her. I ordered nothing to be bought. Yumi had to remain hungry, frightened, and certain that somewhere nearby, there was a person ready to pay for her betrayal. 20 minutes later, she called Satoshi. The detective saw her by the co-working glass wall. Shoulders tense, lips barely moving, fingers crushing the phone. Satoshi answered briefly. It was clear from Yumi's face that he did not calm her down. Billionaires do not like tools that suddenly start demanding protection. After the call, she sat directly on the steps near the exit. The same woman who yesterday taught Akiko to walk like a queen now trembled over the screen, waiting for another message. I looked at the photo and, for the first time that evening, felt not anger, but precision. Yumi opened the archive herself, named the client herself, and proved herself ready to betray him. Mickey secured the files, statements, and correspondence into a separate package. Hiroshi called it the first real key to the board of directors, not just to a marital scandal. The problem was price. To bring the package to a level that Satoshi's army of lawyers could not crush, we needed more people, more reports, and a few more days of work. I looked at my almost empty account and understood that quiet life had ended completely. Tomorrow I would have to sell the last major asset still in my name. The used car appraiser clicked his tongue for a long time, examining a barely visible scratch on the bumper of our old family sedan. I waited silently for his performance to end. He desperately tried to lower the price, telling the usual stories about falling demand for such models. I did not care about his arguments. I had a specific financial goal. The amount he finally named was ridiculous, but I needed live money right now. I took the pen he offered and signed the contract without the slightest hesitation. The car no longer belonged to me. Metal, plastic, and years of memories from trips with Akiko had just been converted into a boring bearer bank check. At that exact moment, a Snow White sports crossover glided into the dealership parking lot. The muffled sound of its powerful engine immediately attracted every employee's attention. The door of the expensive car opened, and Akiko stepped onto the wet asphalt. She wore a new designer dress and carried a bag worth more than my sedan. She slowly removed dark glasses and looked at me with theatrical, poisonous sympathy. In her new, shining world, bought with Satoshi's money, I looked like an irritating stain on a carpet. Kenji, have you really fallen so low that you are selling this wreck? Her voice was loud and clear. She deliberately spoke so the appraiser and other clients could hear. She came closer, surrounding me with the trail of heavy selective perfume. You could have just asked. I would lend you a little money for the first time. I do not mind helping my former husband. She sincerely believed in her crushing victory. In her eyes, I was a pathetic broken loser selling the last remains of a former life to rent a cheap den. I calmly looked at her new crossover, a beautiful toy with 0 mileage and leather interior, a perfect instrument for a person who did not suspect the trap. Thank you for the generous offer, Akiko, but I will manage somehow. Good luck on the roads, I answered evenly, took my documents from the appraiser, and turned toward the parking lot exit. I physically felt the sudden sharp irritation behind me. She desperately wanted to see dark envy, hear angry accusations, or notice wounded masculine pride. My icy indifference brutally broke her script of public triumph. The appraiser tactfully looked away, and Akiko angrily slammed the door of her luxurious, gifted crossover. An hour later, I sat in the corner of an empty chain cafe and stared at the glowing screen of my smartphone. The money from the sale of our former car had already reached my bank account. The amount was small, but it completed my starting operational capital at the right time. I opened the banking application and copied Hiroshi's account number. My finger hovered over the transfer confirmation button for a long second. These were all my personal savings, carefully accumulated over the years of that quiet and predictable life. I pressed confirm and transferred everything down to the last yen. My balance held mere coins, barely enough for a couple of weeks of modest meals and a cheap subway pass. From the viewpoint of credit rating and social status, I had officially become completely bankrupt. A man unable to afford even a sudden doctor visit without new debts. But in my true world, which Akiko had always considered too boring, completely different rules applied. What she proudly called falling to the social bottom was an investment. I was calmly paying for hidden infrastructure. To make Tokyo's best forensic auditors work, you had to pay their market price. That was the basic price of my future freedom. Returning to the former shared apartment for the last time, I took out 2 simple travel bags. Under the harsh divorce terms, I had officially given up all real estate and furnishings. I had exactly 2 hours to pack quickly. I packed only basic clothes, my work laptop, and personal documents. No framed photographs, no souvenirs. The expensive watch Akiko had given me for our anniversary so I would look presentable before her rich friends went straight into the trash. I removed every symbol of the lie. This home had once seemed like a reliable fortress, a quiet harbor for which I had voluntarily muted my analytical skills. Now I saw only cheap plasterboard scenery. Every cup in the kitchen and every carpet in the living room reminded me of how skillfully she had played the role of a faithful wife while planning her escape. The apartment was a museum of my own self-deception. I zipped the bag and looked over the completely empty bedroom. No regrets. My pulse remained even and calm. I crossed that foolish stage out of my history without unnecessary emotion. Leaving the keys on the glass kitchen table, I quietly closed the front door behind me. From that second, the ordinary, compliant employee Kenji the husband officially and irreversibly ceased to exist. Only Kenji the negotiator remained, the invisible architect of systemic crises, and he had already begun his inspection. I took the empty elevator down to the first floor and stepped into Tokyo's cold evening rain. In a cheap room, I placed the bags by the wall and opened the laptop again. Mickey had already prepared a new package, but now it was not a search, it was a weapon inspection. On the screen lay 3 layers of evidence: the restaurant receipt, Yumi's sample archive, and the bank transfers she had pulled in panic after our dinner. Hiroshi joined through a secure connection. He immediately warned that a beautiful scheme was not enough. A court needed not guesses, but a chain that could not be broken by a lawyer's shouting. I nodded and sorted the files into folders. One proved Satoshi's personal connection to Akiko. The second linked Yumi to recruitment. The third led to taxes. The most important item was the receipt. Satoshi thought it was a small demonstration of power, but on paper it was a subsidiary company's expense for dinner with my former wife. Mickey added a payment chart to that receipt. The same firm paid for gifts, trips, and consultations for women who later signed risky NDAs. Yumi had not given us the entire archive, but the sample file was dirty enough. It contained notes about the girl's weaknesses, gift price, and processing speed. Hiroshi stayed silent for a long time, studying the lines. Then he said one such file already turned the story from marital drama into an organized financial scheme. But we could not strike immediately. If everything was dumped into the press, Satoshi would close channels, hide behind lawyers, and call me a resentful ex-husband. I needed a public moment where he himself would speak about honesty, transparency, and responsibility. Then the first blow would land not in the back, but straight in the face. Mickey found that moment almost instantly. Tomorrow, Yamamoto Corporation was holding a charity evening with a live broadcast and Satoshi's speech about business ethics. I looked at the event poster and for the first time that night felt the mechanism aligned perfectly. The enemy had built the stage for his own execution. Akiko was also going there. Her name had already appeared on the closed guest list as the chairman's companion. For her, it was an official entrance into high society. Yumi was supposed to accompany her backstage. After the panic in the co-working space, she was still trying to look useful so Satoshi would not write her off first. I opened fresh photos from the detective. Yumi sat in a car near a beauty salon and nervously checked her phone every few seconds, as if waiting for a sentence. In another picture, Akiko left a boutique with a dress and a silver cover. Her face carried the glow of someone already rehearsing tomorrow's bows. She thought the charity evening would be her coronation. After the divorce, the restaurant, and the gifts, she finally wanted to see envy in other people's eyes. For Satoshi, it was merely convenient framing. A beautiful woman beside him was supposed to distract cameras from frozen offshore accounts and strange expenses. I instructed the detective to stay close to Yumi but not provoke her. She was already afraid. Frightened people are most useful when they think they still choose. Hiroshi, meanwhile, prepared the legal shell for the first strike. Not a leak, not blackmail, not dirty revenge. Only a package for the press and the tax inspection. He insisted that the first package include no personal photos or intimate details. We needed not a bedroom scandal, but a document scandal. I agreed immediately. Destroying Akiko would have been cheap. Destroying Satoshi's system required a clean strike, controlled rhythm, and the right stage. The first package included the restaurant receipt, Sakura Media consulting payments, and 3 anonymized lines from Yumi's archive. Enough to ask a question aloud. The question was simple. Why does a Yamamoto subsidiary pay for personal dinners, gifts, and women who later become signers of dangerous agreements? Mickey added a transfer map. Thin lines went from offshore accounts to Yumi's agency, then to Akiko's gifts, and back to corporate expenses. Even without the full archive, the picture looked disgusting and clear. Money moved not like romance, but like blood through the veins of a large, well-fed parasite. At midnight, Akiko sent me a photo of her dress. The caption was short. Tomorrow you will see the life I chose instead of you. I looked at the screen for a long time and did not answer. She wanted me jealous. She did not understand that she had sent me confirmation of her appearance on the needed stage. A minute later, Yumi left a comment under her post about the new queen of Tokyo. The White Lotus continued pouring poison with sugar, though she herself was already trembling with fear. Mickey dryly noted that Yumi's comment was useful too. It linked her to the public promotion of Akiko on the very day we would strike the scheme. I smiled slightly. Sometimes enemies edit better than any editor. They place faces, dates, receipts, and signatures beside one another themselves, then marvel at the finished accusation. At dawn, Hiroshi sent the final version of the first package. Every page was clean, dry, and legal. No emotions, only numbers and connections. He added one separate line. If Satoshi tried to call this slander, we would immediately raise the question of a full audit of his subsidiaries. It was exactly what we needed. Not a hammer blow, but a needle under the skin. Small enough that he would not protect himself in time, and poisonous enough. During the day, I left the room only once to buy cheap coffee and a charging cable. I had almost no money left, but now poverty worked as camouflage. No one looks for a dangerous enemy among people with a plastic coffee cup and an old jacket, especially if they are used to measuring power only by the brand of a watch. By evening, the detective sent a voice note. Yumi had met Satoshi's lawyer in an underground parking garage and received an envelope with new instructions. She came out pale. According to the detective, Yumi tried several times to call Akiko, but each time ended the call before it connected. She already understood that in this story, friends were not rescued. The system fed women dreams, then ground up the first ones who became inconvenient. I ordered him not to touch her until morning. Let Yumi bring Akiko to the stage herself. Let her lead Akiko where cameras would see not a wife, but part of the scheme. At night, I checked every delivery channel. One package would go to the tax office, the second to a news agency, the third to an assistant of a board member. This was not the final kill. It was the starting shot that would force Satoshi to panic publicly and look for the enemy in the wrong direction. I did not want him to understand at once that I stood behind the blow, let him suspect competitors, former partners, corrupt directors, and resentful officials. The more he looked upward, the calmer I could pass below. That was the beauty of the plan. His arrogance blocked his own view. 2 hours before the event, Mickey showed me the draft headline prepared by journalists. It did not contain my name and did not contain Akiko's name. The headline contained only one question. Why does Yamamoto's charitable company pay for personal entertainment through fictitious consulting? Such a question cannot be ignored. It cannot be easily denied. It can only be drowned out with money. But to do that, Satoshi first had to panic. I looked at the evening schedule. Satoshi's speech on business transparency was exactly 3 minutes after Akiko's appearance on stage beside him. It could not have been more perfect. She would receive her coronation, he would receive applause, and then the first file would hit them under the camera lights. 1 hour before the broadcast, the first real risk appeared. The detective reported that Satoshi's security had started checking old connections among club employees and requested a list of night calls. Taro's name could surface too early. If they pressed him, the club recording would disappear, and my first source would become a frightened witness without protection. I ordered Hiroshi to urgently prepare legal cover for Taro. He had to look not like an informant, but like an employee who had recorded a protocol violation in advance. It cost more money, which I almost did not have. But if one screw fell out, the whole chain of evidence would begin to ring false. Mickey suggested postponing the strike by 1 day. She spoke correctly and cautiously, like a professional who understood the cost of premature movement. I refused. Satoshi was already alert, Yumi was already cleaning archives, and Akiko could sign new papers tomorrow, sinking even deeper into his dirty scheme. Sometimes it is dangerous to attack too early, but it is even more dangerous to wait until the enemy realizes that his smooth road is actually mined. Hiroshi cursed, but agreed. He said that if everything collapsed, we would be crushed legally and financially. For the first time, real fear sounded in his voice. I answered that fear was useful. It makes you check every comma, every date, and every source. Courage without verified documents is simply suicide. While the team closed risks, Akiko went live from the dressing room. She laughed, spun in front of the mirror, and thanked Yumi for a new chance in life. Yumi stood beside her and smiled so softly, as if she had not tried an hour earlier to sell an archive for money and hide her own tracks before the first search. Viewers in the comments admired Akiko's dress and wrote that she finally looked like the woman of a real billionaire. My former wife glowed with happiness. I saved the broadcast recording. It was not just a beautiful shot. It was a public scene where Yumi connected herself, Akiko, and the Yamamoto evening. Before the event began, Satoshi sent Akiko a short message. The detective caught its reflection in the mirror. Smile and say nothing without my signal. That phrase said more about him than any secret recording. To Satoshi, she was not a partner, but decoration allowed to move only on command. At 9 in the evening, I sat in my room before 2 monitors. One showed the event broadcast, the other flashed with prepared delivery channels. Mickey was connected. Hiroshi too. The detective watched the service entrance. Taro from the club sent a short message. Satoshi is sure everything's under control. That phrase has always been the favorite sound of any catastrophe. People say it only when they already stand on the edge and still admire the view. Akiko appeared on screen. She smiled so widely as if our entire past marriage had been a dirty stairway she had finally climbed toward the light. Satoshi took her hand. The hall applauded. Yumi stood backstage on the side, holding a phone and trying to keep her face steady before the cameras. I took a sip of cold coffee and looked at the clock. Less than 3 minutes remained before the peak of their triumph. My finger rested on the key. Now I no longer needed to prove that Akiko was wrong. I had to show all Tokyo what dirty foundation supported her new world. Satoshi approached the microphone. The hall grew silent. He smiled confidently, almost lazily because he did not yet know the first crack was already crawling across his glass tower. The camera showed his face in close-up. Perfect chin, calm eyes, expensive smile of a man accustomed to buying not only services, but silence. Akiko stood beside him, almost breathless with delight. She was certain the whole hall saw in her a woman who had risen above ordinary life. Yumi held a tablet with the schedule backstage. Her fingers trembled, but her smile remained gentle. The White Lotus still played purity before the cameras. At that moment, I checked the delivery timer. The first package had to go not at the start of the speech, but at the phrase about transparency and responsibility. It mattered. Let Satoshi say the word that would tear his reputation apart. The best traps always make the enemy swear an oath before the fall. Hiroshi sent the final confirmation. Legal wording clean, sources covered, counterclaim risk minimal. All that remained was to press. Mickey added a dry message. If he denies it, the second package can be released in 15 minutes. I appreciated her professional calm. I placed my finger on the key and watched Satoshi inhale before the most beautiful lie of the evening. His voice was already sounding in the hall when the trap closed. On the second monitor, the secure messenger window glowed. Auditor Mickey sent a short message. Tanaka-san, data packages are formed. Press and tax channels are open. It was not the full dossier. It was the first carefully measured strike. A small but undeniable part of the information about hiding corporate income through subsidiaries. I could not collapse every card at once. If Satoshi received time to prepare, his lawyers would tear the case apart in court. I needed to provoke public panic. Launch, I typed. A green upload bar ran across the screen. The files went to the largest news agency and to the National Tax Administration Division. I leaned back in the chair and turned up the volume. Satoshi was ending his pompous speech, promising investors record dividends in the next financial quarter. The hall exploded in applause. Akiko proudly straightened her back, enjoying her connection to this greatness. She thought these people were applauding her too. The illusion was perfect. Then something happened that no one expected. First in the first row, then in the second, then throughout the hall, smartphone screens began to light up, one after another, continuously. The sound of dozens, then hundreds of vibrating phones merged into a single anxious hum that swallowed the last claps. People lowered their eyes in unison to glowing screens. Satoshi froze at the microphone. His flawless smile twitched. He was used to controlling the crowd's attention, but now everyone in the hall looked not at him, but at a text alert. The text was merciless. Breaking news. Tax authorities have begun an inspection of Yamamoto Corporation on suspicion of systemic financial fraud and major non-payment. On the video, the atmosphere changed clearly. A moment ago, these people were ready to kiss his hands. Now they looked at him as if he carried a dangerous disease. The chairman of a major bank, standing closest to the stage, was the first to take a step back. A microscopic movement, but in the world of status, it meant a public death sentence. Akiko understood nothing. She continued smiling stiffly, trying to catch Satoshi's eye, but he did not even look at her. His eyes feverishly scanned the hall. Satoshi's chief assistant hurried toward the stage. He looked pale and frightened. Reaching him, he whispered something in his boss's ear and handed him a tablet with the news. The billionaire's face turned ashen gray. The philanthropist's mask fell away, revealing a confused fraudster. He pushed the assistant's hand away sharply and stepped back to the microphone. Dear guests, this is a misunderstanding, a simple bureaucratic error that my lawyers will resolve tomorrow morning, he said. His voice was loud, but it vibrated treacherously. No one believed him. In the world of big money, rumors move faster than any court. If the tax authorities announce a public inspection, it means they already have reinforced concrete evidence. Whispers in the hall grew into a buzzing swarm. Investors calculated losses. Board members frantically typed messages, distancing themselves from the scandal. Akiko finally understood that something terrible was happening. Her fairy tale was collapsing before thousands of viewers. She tried to take Satoshi's arm to show support. He jerked his hand away. That gesture landed in every camera lens. In a moment of crisis, she stopped being a trophy companion. She instantly became ballast, dragging him down. The broadcast operators, smelling blood, took close-ups. Akiko's face twisted with humiliation. Her smile became a miserable grimace. She remained on stage completely alone. Satoshi walked quickly toward the exit. Security pushed former friends and partners away from him. No one tried to shake his hand. People stepped aside, saving their reputations. I watched that flight with absolute calm. My pulse remained steady. This was not the triumph of an avenger. It was the cold calculation of a crisis negotiator. The phone vibrated briefly. A message from Hiroshi. The news is out. The market reacted instantly. Yamamoto's shares fell 15% in 10 minutes. Excellent work, I answered. But this is only the beginning. Let them think it was an accidental leak. We wait. The greatest mistake of an arrogant enemy is made in panic. I switched tabs. Journalists were already besieging the main exit. Satoshi tried to break through to his limousine through a dense ring of microphones, blinding flashes, and uncomfortable questions. Mr. Yamamoto, did you hide income? Is it true that subsidiaries were used to move funds? Will you be arrested? The question struck him harder than blows. He did not answer. Guards shoved the press away until Satoshi dived into the back seat of the black car. The door slammed, cutting him off from the collapsing disgrace. I knew what was happening inside that car. He was shouting at assistance, demanding to find the competitor who leaked the information, searching desperately for an enemy among oligarchs equal to himself. His unbelievable arrogance would not allow him to consider that the avalanche had been started by an ordinary office worker. The same loser he and Akiko had laughed at for so long. He would spend resources fighting ghosts. He would begin attacking other corporations, creating powerful enemies, and destroying the last remnants of his protection. Meanwhile, the broadcast returned to the hall. Akiko slowly descended the steps. Her expensive dress now looked not like a symbol of power, but like a ridiculous costume. Women who had admired her diamonds an hour earlier looked at her with contempt. In their world, there's no place for those caught in a dirty public scandal. She took out her phone and began calling. Her hands trembled. She pressed the phone to her ear and looked around for support, but former acquaintances simply walked past, averting their eyes. I could predict whom she was calling. Her best friend Yumi. The same social lioness who had whispered to her about Satoshi's greatness and persuaded her to leave me for a luxurious life. But Yumi was Satoshi's paid recruiter. And right now that recruiter was frantically cleaning bank accounts, saving her own skin from approaching justice. On the screen, Akiko lowered the phone. No one had answered. Her perfect world, built on lies and other people's money, turned out to be empty. She had no one left. Photographers turned their attention to her. Flashes hit her face, fixing every second of the fall. I closed the laptop lid. The image went dark. The room sank into silence. No gloating, just a statement of fact. The first phase of sanitation went according to plan. In the world of large corporations, status is a paper fortress. Today I struck the match. Now I only had to watch the fire. Satoshi would rush around, threaten the board, and demand loyalty. And every panicked action would become new evidence. The phone signaled. A message from the detective. Object number 2 is in panic. Yumi tried to buy a ticket to Singapore. The transaction on her cards was declined. Accounts frozen. I smiled. The tax service does not forgive fraud. Once an official investigation begins, suspicious consultants' accounts are blocked automatically. Leave her, I answered the detective. She has nowhere to run. Let her sit in Tokyo. She will give up Satoshi herself when she understands that real prison time for complicity is shining ahead. Traitors always betray each other. Once money disappears, loyalty disappears with it. Yumi would sell her boss for a plea deal without the slightest remorse. I poured myself cold water. A long night lay ahead. I had to analyze market reaction and prepare the next package of documents for the corporation's board of directors. They still thought it was a media attack. They did not yet know that a time bomb was inside their company, and the timer of irreversible destruction had already started. Tomorrow, Satoshi would call a meeting. He would demand unity. He would promise mountains of gold to those who stayed with him and ruin to those who doubted his impunity. At that moment, I would deliver the second blow, directly at his power. But first I had to wait until he finally believed he could control the chaos. I opened the secure folder on the server. It contained copies of fictitious contracts Akiko had signed without reading, documents making her an accomplice in a money laundering scheme. Once, I'd tried to explain to her that easy money does not exist, but she preferred the sweet words of a billionaire. She despised my ordinary job and called caution cowardice. Now that cowardice was the only thing that had saved me from investigation. I felt no pity for her. She was simply a variable Satoshi had used against me. The phone screen lit up. Incoming call. The number was hidden, but I knew exactly who it was. People in panic always look for familiar support. I accepted the call and stayed silent. Night street noise sounded in the background. Then came a broken, trembling breath. "Kenji, it is me," Akiko said. Her voice was barely recognizable. There was no arrogance or command left in it. "I am listening," I answered evenly. My voice sounded as if a call center operator had offered me a service. I was not going to give her even the smallest emotional hook. "Kenji, a nightmare happened. Satoshi left. He just abandoned me there. Journalists almost tore me apart. Yumi is not answering. My credit card is blocked. I cannot leave." She spoke fast, swallowing tears. She expected me to rush to save her, to arrive, calm her, and say that my love was stronger than her dirty, calculated betrayal. "I am sorry to hear you have problems, Akiko," I said, looking at the falling share chart. "But we are divorced. Your logistical difficulties are no longer in my jurisdiction." A dead pause hung on the line. She had not expected that answer. In her picture of the world, I had always remained a faithful dog. "Kenji, please. I am scared. Order me a taxi to our home." "Whose home?" I clarified coldly. "The apartment is sold. The money is transferred. I have no home for you anymore. And your new home will soon become material evidence." She gasped as if I had hit her. "Did you watch the news? Kenji, it is a mistake. Satoshi will fix everything. He is influential. This is the work of envious people. You do not understand this business." Her blind faith in Satoshi was astonishing. Standing on the street without money, abandoned by her idol, she still defended his system and humiliated me. Perfect finale. "Maybe I do not understand something," I calmly agreed. "For example, I do not understand why you signed asset transfers into your own name. That was a very brave step, Akiko." The line went quiet again. The silence was soaked with animal fear. "How do you know about those documents?" she whispered. Realization had begun to reach her. "It is public information for those who know how to search." I lied without changing tone. "I advise you to find a good criminal lawyer. Our divorce lawyer will not help here." "Criminal lawyer? Kenji. What are you talking about?" "I did nothing. I accepted gifts." She slipped into hysteria. The illusion of safety crumbled into dust at that second. "The tax office thinks differently. Gifts worth millions without tax payment are money laundering. And your signature is on every tranche. Good luck in court, Akiko. Goodbye forever." I ended the call before she could answer. There was nothing left to discuss. Her role had been played. Now she was a problem for law enforcement. I blocked her number. My former wife had wanted so badly to live in the world of high status. Now she would receive it fully, including public interrogations, frozen accounts, and shame in the press. I opened the news again. Articles about the fall of Yamamoto Corporation appeared one after another. Journalists were already publishing diagrams passed to them by Mickey. Everything worked like clockwork. It was the perfect storm. Media pressure forced authorities to act harshly, preventing Satoshi from using corrupt connections. The public loudly demanded blood. I checked the detectives' reports. Satoshi had arrived at his central office. He was gathering the best crisis managers, trying to develop a corporate legal defense strategy. They would search for the leak in financial departments. They would test managers on lie detectors. They would suspect competitors. They would do everything except the obvious. They would never notice the gray man who simply signed divorce papers and stepped into the shadows. Their class blindness was my deadliest weapon in this war. Hiroshi sent another message. "Emergency Yamamoto board meeting tomorrow morning. Satoshi will try to convince them to keep him in position. He will desperately press with authority." That was the information I had been waiting for. The board of directors are sharks. They are loyal to Satoshi only while he brings them enormous profit and corporate safety. "Prepare the couriers, Hiroshi," I typed. "Tomorrow morning, every board member receives a personal package. A full copy of the dossier proving Satoshi led this scheme." "Are you sure?" the lawyer answered. "If we give them the full dossier, there's no way back. They will use it to destroy him. It will be corporate execution in real time." "I am absolutely sure. This is not a trial, Hiroshi. This is an audit. And Satoshi Yamamoto has proven to be a toxic asset subject to immediate liquidation. Tomorrow he loses the company completely." I closed the chat. The first blow destroyed Satoshi's public reputation. It stripped him of his untouchable status and turned him into a suspect. But he still had his money and power. Tomorrow I would take those too. I would kick the stool from under his empire with the hands of the very people he considered servants. He would be betrayed, just as he had betrayed others. I looked at nighttime Tokyo. Somewhere out there, Akiko was crying in the street. trying to understand how her life had become a nightmare. Satoshi was yelling at subordinates and blaming invisible enemies, and Yumi was panicking about whom she could sell her boss to at the highest price in order not to go to prison. They thought they could play with destinies without consequence. They were fatally wrong. The headlights of a passing car lit my dark room. I closed the curtains, cutting myself off from the outside world. Emotions no longer mattered. Only the final phase remained. Tomorrow the board would receive the documents. Satoshi Yamamoto would learn what real panic is. He would learn what it means to be thrown into the street by those he trusted completely. I switched off the light and lay down. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. It was not happiness. It was the cold calm of a man who had just restored order. The mechanism had started, and no one could stop it. The audit continued, and the toxic assets prepared for inevitable write-off. My former wife wanted a fairy tale, but received the law. The enemy had fallen into a trap. He was searching for someone stronger than him in the world of the rich. But he was being destroyed by the man he considered nobody, using the law the billionaire so arrogantly despised.
Arrogance is the perfect trap. When the elite become used to seeing people only as tools, they go blind. They do not notice their executioner because they always look only upward.
Toshi's heavy fist slammed onto the massive mahogany desk so hard that an expensive crystal water glass rang pitifully and almost tipped over. The accounts of 5 key transit offshore entities had been frozen by the tax inspection without the slightest warning. For the billionaire, this was not merely an unexpected financial problem. It was public humiliation, a slap from the state system he had spent years considering completely bought and obedient to his whims. 3 highly paid corporate lawyers stood before him with lowered heads, afraid even to raise their eyes to their enraged and unpredictable boss. His face, which had radiated absolute confidence at the charity event yesterday, was now blotched red with uncontrolled savage fury. "Who leaked this?" Satoshi growled, hurling a leather folder with reports against the wall. Papers flew across the office like white flags of an army surrendering in panic. His inflamed mind refused to accept the logical reality. In his perfect world, no minor player had enough courage for such audacity. The conclusion formed by itself. It could only be someone of his own weight class, someone with similar resources and connections in business media. Fujiwara Corporation, Satoshi hissed through his teeth. That old vulture has long wanted a piece of my logistics market. There's simply no one else who could have done this. He immediately ordered his lawyers to begin a dirty media campaign against his main competitor. Raise old lawsuits, set loyal journalists on them. While Satoshi declared war on Fujiwara Corporation, I sat in an unremarkable cafe 3 streets from his glass tower and calmly watched the chaos. It was the classic mistake of every narcissist. When his crown cracks, he searches for an enemy among kings, completely ignoring the invisible shadow at his feet. News feeds on my screen were already full of headlines about the sharp escalation of the corporate war between Yamamoto and Fujiwara. The market responded with rapid decline. Satoshi mindlessly spent millions of yen on commissioned articles and redirected all security to defend against mythical corporate espionage from a competitor. At that moment, my phone vibrated briefly. Mickey sent an encrypted message. She confirmed that Yamamoto's IT department had fully shifted its attention. Their digital perimeters were aimed at repelling external attacks from the competitor. The back door through which gray payments went to recruiters remained almost unprotected. I took a sip of cold coffee. My bait had worked perfectly. Satoshi had opened the gates of his fortress himself, carried away by his theatrical fist-waving. Meanwhile, an entirely different drama unfolded in Yamamoto's luxurious penthouse. Akiko sat on the edge of a leather sofa, nervously twisting her diamond bracelet. Beside her stood a deathly pale Yumi. Only an hour earlier, Satoshi had urgently summoned them both. His voice on the phone promised nothing but a brutal interrogation. The doors opened, and Satoshi rushed into the living room. All his decorative gallantry had evaporated, leaving only a cold and merciless predator before the women. "Which of you talked?" he asked quietly. That whisper frightened Akiko much more than shouting. For the first time, she understood how insignificant her place was in his world. Yumi tried to portray outrage and speak about loyalty, but Satoshi cut her off rudely. He reminded her that she existed in the elite only because of his handouts. You both signed documents. You both knew how the gifts were processed. If one of your chatty friends leaked information to nosy journalists, Akiko curled inward, trying to protect herself from his gaze. She began justifying herself in broken phrases, swearing that no one had access to her papers in the home safe. Satoshi suddenly stopped and measured her with a contemptuous look. A sudden humiliating realization flashed in his eyes, making Akiko physically nauseous. "And what about your little ex-husband?" Satoshi smirked. "That dull clerk. Maybe he accidentally found statements and decided to sell them to someone for pennies?" Akiko shook her head desperately. The idea that Kenji could play such a complex game seemed absurd to her. To her, I had always been the passive background of her life. "Kenji? No, that is impossible. He's too stupid and spineless for this. Even during the divorce, he did not say a word. He just signed everything and left empty-handed." Satoshi grimaced irritably. The mention of the worthless husband only annoyed him. "He saw no real threat in me, so he threw the thought away like trash. If I find out the original leak came from either of you, I will destroy you both," he said at the end and left, abandoning the women in ringing, paralyzing silence. Yumi looked at Akiko with undisguised malice. For the first time, the caring friend mask cracked. Their sisterly friendship was merely a failed business project. "This is all because of you, idiot," Yumi hissed, nervously collecting her bag. "If my accounts are frozen, I swear I will not go down alone. You will be dragged after me." Akiko remained in the empty living room, completely alone. Her beautiful fairy tale about a rich and powerful prince on a white horse had just turned into a dirty criminal nightmare. She tried to book a table at her favorite restaurant to calm her nerves, but the host answered in an icy tone that service for her card was temporarily suspended. Satoshi's toxicity began quickly infecting everything around him. People in elite circles had a phenomenal instinct for trouble and had already begun isolating her from society. In my team's secret office, work did not stop for a second. The detective sat tensely at the monitors, intercepting internal mail from the corporation's central apparatus. Mickey typed quickly on the keyboard. Her eyes shone with real professional excitement. We were directly inside the circulatory system of a transnational fraudster. "Tanaka-san, this is incredible," she said without looking away from the screen. "They are so certain of their invulnerability that they kept real contracts on the server." I approached her workstation. Long transaction lists flashed on the monitor, along with amounts of illegal commission payments and hidden registers of so-called fictitious gifts. In one folder, we found a complete database of all women Yumi had recruited for Satoshi's shadow schemes. My former wife's name was highlighted separately in yellow. Beside her name stood Yumi's notes: socially ambitious, easily influenced, legally absolutely illiterate, ideal candidate for registration of toxic assets. I looked at that dry text without the slightest emotion. It was final proof that their whole elite life had been only a dirty financial conveyor belt. Akiko sincerely thought she had been chosen for beauty and uniqueness. In reality, she was chosen for greed. She was only a cheap screen for hiding criminal money. "Download everything without exception," I ordered Mickey briefly. "I need not only these registers, I need direct links to Satoshi Yamamoto's personal offshore accounts." The secure copying process showed slow progress. 50%, 70. Each downloaded file was another nail in the coffin lid of Satoshi's corporation. Meanwhile, the aggressive media war Satoshi launched against competitors began producing destructive reverse results. He had struck too hard and too crudely. Fujiwara's lawyers answered with harsh counterclaims for defamation, and publicly stated that Yamamoto was clumsily trying to distract attention from his own tax collapse. That loud informational noise drew even more attention to Satoshi's company from the Economic Crimes Division. The ring began to tighten. Satoshi rushed around his huge office like a trapped beast. He screamed at public relations staff, demanding they stop the share decline, but the market does not forgive such mistakes from a CEO. His blind certainty in his own exceptional nature had finally turned against him. He still believed he could control reality with shouting and big money. But the system I had quietly launched had no human emotions. The tax agency did not react to his hysteria. Police auditors did not fear his threats. That evening, my personal phone suddenly vibrated. I looked at the screen and saw a name I had mentally erased long ago, though old habit still remembered it. It was Akiko. I let the call continue for several long seconds, coldly analyzing the situation. Her call meant psychological pressure had reached its limit. I answered and raised the phone to my ear. Her strained, broken voice sounded through the line. She was mortally afraid and desperately searching for a safe harbor. "Kenji, sorry for calling so late. I know I should not, but I have no one else to call," she began. In her pitiful tone, not a drop of former contempt remained. She sobbed quietly. I could vividly imagine her sitting in her designer apartment, surrounded by other people's things that would soon be confiscated as evidence in a criminal case. Satoshi has gone mad. He is shouting. He suspects everyone around. He looks at me as if I am a piece of dirt. I am so tired, Kenji. I just wanted a normal, beautiful life. She sincerely expected me to begin comforting her. She was used to me being her convenient emotional lightning rod, the man who understood everything, forgave everything, and took the blame on himself. Her selfish mind refused to accept that the rules of the game had changed forever. She thought her betrayal was merely a mistake that could be washed away with a couple of tears. I stayed silent. The heavy silence on the line became denser and more unbearable for her. I could physically feel her hope breaking against the cold wall of my complete indifference. "Kenji, do you hear me? Please say something. I feel so alone. Maybe we should meet and just talk. Like in the old good times?" In her trembling words, there was not a gram of repentance for betrayal. There was only animal fear of losing comfort and a pathetic desire to hide behind my back from the coming storm. "Akiko," my voice sounded so even and lifeless that she fell silent immediately. "We are officially divorced. Your private life and criminal fears no longer concern me." I heard her draw in a sharp breath. That short answer hurt her more than any insult. I had simply deprived her of the status of a meaningful person in my universe. "But we were family. You cannot just cross me out. You always said you would protect me." Her voice broke into an outraged, desperate scream. "I protected my family, but you chose another corporation. Now you will have to deal with its risks yourself. Good luck at the interrogations." "Akiko, goodbye forever." I ended the call before she could say anything else. Her miserable attempts to manipulate our shared past no longer had any power over me. In this ruthless chess game, she had finally become used legal material that could no longer influence the outcome of my final offensive. I placed the phone on the table and looked at the monitor. The data loading bar on the detective's screen froze at 99%. Only seconds remained. The room was crystal quiet. Only the steady hum of cooling fans broke the atmosphere. My team held its breath, understanding the colossal scale of the operation ending before us. At that exact moment, Satoshi was probably screaming at his assistants, absolutely sure the main threat came from television reports and vengeful business competitors. He did not even suspect that his empire no longer belonged to him. Every contract, every shadow transaction, and every illegal NDA was now in my hands. The indicator on the screen flashed green. A quiet system signal sounded. Data loading was complete. Yamamoto's servers had given us all their secrets. Mickey leaned back tiredly and took off her glasses. A completely triumphant smile appeared on her face. That night operation became the peak of her brilliant auditing career. "We got everything, Tanaka-san," she stated quietly. "Absolutely everything. Internal black accounting, board correspondence, offshore routes. Their perimeters fully crossed." The detective nodded approvingly. The enormous mass of information capable of destroying one of Japan's most influential structures forever was carefully packed into one digital archive. I approached the screen and looked at the summary table. The final numbers of unpaid taxes were counted in billions of yen. It was more than enough to put Satoshi in prison for a long time. "Excellent work," I said, my voice professionally even, though cold satisfaction pulsed inside me. "Now we have to turn these files into a sentence." Hiroshi, who had been silently studying printouts of Yumi's contracts, slowly lifted his head. He understood the lethal legal weight of every line we had downloaded. "Satoshi still sincerely thinks he can buy his way out," Hiroshi said. "He will try to pressure the board into covering his personal losses with company funds." "That is exactly why we strike where he least expects it," I answered. "His illusory power rests on the board's loyalty, and the board's loyalty rests on profit. If the board realizes that Satoshi has become a toxic asset that will drag them all to the financial bottom, they will cut his throat themselves much faster than any district prosecutor." "Mickey, Prepare a hard extract of the dirtiest schemes, I ordered. Make it understandable, even for those who cannot read balance sheets. Only dry facts, sums, and direct proof. I looked at the clock. Less than 2 days remained before Yamamoto Corporation's emergency board meeting. Satoshi planned to appear there with a speech about his complete innocence. He intended to publicly accuse competitors of sabotage and ask shareholders for a mandate of trust. It was his last desperate chance to keep control of his collapsing empire. I was not going to deprive him of that chance. On the contrary, I wanted him to step onto the platform with maximum pride. I wanted him to taste victory 1 second before falling into the abyss. Hiroshi-san, I turned to my lawyer. We need anonymous courier delivery, 10 sealed folders. They must land on the board table exactly 1 hour before the meeting. Hiroshi nodded knowingly. He knew better than anyone that this hard maneuver left the enemy no chance. When undeniable proof lies before everyone at once, hiding it becomes impossible. Satoshi had cornered himself with his paranoia. He'd been so desperate to find a mythical spy among other billionaires that he had completely forgotten to test the strength of his own foundation. Akiko and Yumi had already begun devouring each other in miserable attempts to survive. They became perfect lightning rods for his anger, fully hiding my methodical and silent preparation for execution. I looked at the folder of printouts lying on the table, now a finished work of art. My deep crisis audit was practically complete. Tanaka-san, Miki interrupted my thoughts while forming the final encrypted archive. All documents are strictly structured. We are fully ready to send. What is your next step? I slowly buttoned my cheap office jacket. I was ready to wear the mask of an unremarkable clerk one last time and personally enjoy the finale of this corporate performance. Next, I smiled coldly, looking at the blinking cursor on the black screen. Next, we simply hand out the sheet music. It is time to prepare the final chord. A courier entered the meeting room without knocking and placed a sealed folder before each director. Satoshi fell silent in the middle of his victory speech. 1 second earlier, he had been telling the board how quickly he would crush the morning slander. Now the whole room looked not at him, but at the thick envelopes. "What is this garbage?" he roared. "Who let a courier in here?" Security stood by the doors, and for some reason did not move, as if they had already changed masters. Chairman Nakamura opened his folder first. Satoshi smirked, expecting newspaper gossip. But after 2 pages, the old man's smile disappeared. I sat in a car across the street and knew exactly what he was reading. There were no assumptions in the folder, only accounts, dates, signatures, and real transfers. There was a scheme of fictitious services through which money left the corporation, returned as gifts, and settled on women like Akiko. A separate sheet showed the transfer to Yumi's hidden account. The payment purpose sounded almost funny. Selection of elite personnel for closed projects. Satoshi slammed his fist on the table. He still thought a loud voice could cancel documents already lying before the board. "This is fake," he roared. "My lawyers will tear apart everyone involved in this cheap provocation against my company." One director silently pushed the folder away, not because he did not believe it, because the document already smelled like a tax inspection. Another director opened a stock market application on his tablet. His face turned pale before he could say anything aloud or hide the screen. Nakamura lifted his eyes. In that gaze, there was no longer respect for the founder. There was only the calculation of a man saving his own skin. "Shareholders have already received copies," he said quietly. "If we protect you now, tomorrow we fall with you and your accounts." That was the first real crack. People who had called him sir that morning were already deciding how far it was safest to stand from the corpse of his reputation. Satoshi sharply reached for the intercom. "Call security. Immediately. I want to know who staged this circus in my own hall." Nakamura caught his hand before the finger touched the button. The old man did not raise his voice, and that made the blow sound stronger. "Security has already received a new order. Legal department too. The corporation no longer pays for the defense of a suspect." Satoshi froze. At that moment, he lost not money. He lost the main instrument of power, people who used to execute his command before thought. "I hold the controlling stake," he hissed. "I will throw every one of you into the street and erase your families from the business world with one call." Nakamura pressed a button on the tablet. 6 guards entered the room, but their eyes were not on the courier. They were on the former master of the building. "Emergency vote," the chairman said. "Immediate suspension of Satoshi Yamamoto from all authority until the inspection is complete." Hands rose one after another. No one argued. No one defended him. Even those who had drunk whiskey with him yesterday looked only into their folders. Satoshi stood at the head of the table, but for the first time he looked not like the owner of an empire, but like a man whose name had become a threat to other people's portfolios. "You will all regret this," he spat and stepped toward the exit, still expecting security to part respectfully before him as before. 2 security men took him by the arms. Satoshi jerked, but the cameras in the corners were already recording not a boss, but a suspended suspect. He was not allowed into his office. Security led him through the common floor, where employees for the first time looked at him not from below, but directly in the face. One manager lifted a phone and began recording. A second later, 3 more screens lit up in the hands of people who yesterday had feared even saying his surname. By the elevator, Satoshi's secretary stepped aside and closed a folder in front of herself. She said not a word, but that silence was enough for complete humiliation. Outside, security pushed him through the glass doors. His personal driver saw the scene, turned pale, and simply drove away, letting the Maybach vanish around the corner. Satoshi took out his phone and called an official from the ministry. The line dropped immediately. A second call to a media holding went to voicemail. He tried to open the banking application. A red alert appeared on the screen. Access temporarily restricted at the request of internal control. That was when panic reached his face. He had bought not loyalty, but rented smiles. The lease ended the minute the documents surfaced. At the same time, Yumi sat in a restaurant opposite Akiko. Champagne stood on the table, and Akiko was telling how pathetically I had sold the old car. Yumi's phone trembled with messages. First she read that Satoshi was suspended, then that servers were being seized, then that Nakamura was handing documents to the tax office. Akiko was still choosing a swimsuit for the next trip. She smiled so carelessly as if the world around her were not turning into an interrogation report. "Are you listening to me?" she asked capriciously. "Kenji is completely at the bottom now. He probably cannot even buy dinner after selling the car." Yumi looked at her with empty eyes. For the recruiter, that fool was no longer a friend or a client. She had become living evidence. "Shut up, Akiko," Yumi hissed. "Satoshi protects no one anymore. If you sign papers, pray you are not the first one to fall under inspection." Akiko froze with the glass in her hand. She didn't understand the meaning of the words, but for the first time heard not care in Yumi's voice, but pure animal fear. Yumi rushed toward the exit while calling a lawyer. Her heels struck marble faster than she could delete messages from the closed chat. I watched everything from the laptop screen in the car. The detective sent video after video. The board, the street, the restaurant, the first cracks in their alliance. Hiroshi called. He said the dossier had worked perfectly and the board had cut Satoshi off from the company themselves. For the first time, his voice sounded almost satisfied. "Should we leave it there?" he asked. Without the company, Yamamoto is no longer the same predator. Maybe one blow and public suspension is enough. I looked at the 3 folders for couriers. Giving him time meant giving him a chance to regroup and buy a new lie. "Send everything," I said. "The tax office, the police, and the news agency must receive identical packages simultaneously." In my earpiece, Mickey asked whether I understood the consequences. After this delivery, neither Satoshi, nor Yumi, nor Akiko with her new life would return. "They signed their own roles," I answered. "I am simply handing the script to those who know how to stamp papers and put on handcuffs." A minute later, 3 couriers left different buildings. One carried the dossier to inspectors, the second to investigators, the third to the editor of a major television channel. I looked at the Yamamoto Tower and for the first time that day felt not anger, but silence. The machine they had fed with greed had finally turned against them.
When power rests only on fear and money, it collapses instantly. Once one document surfaces, yesterday's king becomes an expense.
Only 40 minutes had passed since the dossier was sent, but for Tokyo's financial world, that was enough time for catastrophe. I sat in the back seat of the sedan Mickey had parked near the necessary building and carefully watched the bright screens of my laptop. My plan, which I had built with icy calculation over the last weeks, was turning into a digital guillotine for these self-assured people. Japan's largest news channel interrupted its programming with a breaking broadcast, and the monitor instantly filled with a red background. The anchor, wearing an alarmed face, read sensational information about an unprecedented tax evasion and black capital laundering scheme. Chief Executive Satoshi Yamamoto was officially named as the main suspect. According to the media, his personal accounts had already been frozen. At that very moment, Akiko, still not understanding the scale of the approaching tsunami, decided to relieve stress and indulge in expensive shopping. In her handbag lay the same exclusive platinum credit card, directly linked to one of the vulnerable Satoshi's shadow accounts. Those were the same accounts being methodically and mercilessly blocked right now by the cold algorithms of Tokyo's financial police. Akiko strolled arrogantly between rows of designer clothing, demanding royal attention with capricious superiority. She selected items from a limited collection worth about $30,000, without thinking about the price for even a second. To her, they were just boring numbers on a screen, numbers her powerful lover always obediently paid at the first snap of her fingers. The senior manager of the elite boutique smiled politely and swiped the platinum card through the terminal. A sharp electronic refusal beep sounded. A red message appeared on the display saying the transaction was declined. The consultant kept her professional smile and automatically apologized for the error. Akiko became indignant and rudely demanded that the card be run again, loudly announcing to the whole boutique that this was a VIP account of Yamamoto Corporation. The terminal issued a hard refusal again, but this time, a specific tax block code appeared on the register screen. The manager instantly turned pale. Her servile professional smile evaporated, replaced by the disgusted expression of an experienced employee. In a dry tone, she informed Akiko that the card had been fully blocked by the tax agency and demanded that she leave the store immediately. Akiko broke into a hysterical shriek, threatening to call Satoshi and fire the entire staff right now. Then she took out her smartphone. Wealthy shoppers around her stopped choosing clothes and openly looked at the scene with undisguised contempt. Someone in the crowd said loudly that the news was showing that same Yamamoto dummy who faced 10 years of real prison. Those merciless words struck Akiko with crushing force. Her perfect crystal world shattered into a million sharp pieces. She finally realized that she was not a chosen queen at all, but merely a convenient legal screen for legitimizing someone else's money. Dropping the phone onto the perfect marble floor, Akiko rushed out of the boutique in wild panic, forgetting her designer purchases forever. At the same time, on the other side of the noisy city, Yumi sat in an expensive cafe, nervously sipping a cold latte and scrolling through the news feed. She already knew about Satoshi's public suspension. Her fingers trembled finely as she desperately tried to transfer money to an offshore account. The banking application on her phone suddenly froze. Then a soul-chilling notification about restricted access appeared on the screen. The heavy cafe doors opened, and 3 agents from the Economic Crimes Division entered confidently in strict suits. They headed straight for her table without hesitation. Yumi tried to stand, but her legs treacherously weakened from the rush of fear. The senior officer loudly read the warrant for her immediate arrest on charges of complicity in money laundering and organizing shadow schemes. The socialites sitting at the next table instantly turned away, showing with their whole appearance that they had never known this criminal. The main recruiter of the Yamamoto Empire, who had sold other people's destinies for dirty commissions for years, now became crushed dirt herself. Cold steel handcuffs snapped shut on her manicured wrists with a dry clink. The poisonous white lotus had finally been torn out by the roots. At that moment, Satoshi Yamamoto himself staggered heavily into the very luxurious penthouse he had rented in my former wife's name. His expensive, exclusive suit was soaked with cold sweat. His blocked credit cards did not work, and he had to give the taxi driver his watch. He rushed through the spacious living room like a hunted animal, furiously throwing furniture aside. In the hidden wall, safe lay $300,000 in cash. That money was supposed to be just enough to buy new documents at the Yokohama port and disappear forever on a cargo ship to the Philippines. With trembling wet fingers, he entered the secret code on the panel. The safe beeped shortly and opened, revealing neat bank bundles. Satoshi exhaled convulsively, grabbed a large sports bag from the dressing room, and began feverishly stuffing the saving cash inside. At that moment, the front door flew open with a crash. Breathless and pale as death, Akiko burst into the apartment with horribly smeared makeup. She saw Satoshi on his knees with money and began hysterically screaming about block cards and the threat of prison, demanding immediate explanations. Yamamoto turned to her very slowly. In his bloodshot eyes pulsed the animal fear of a cornered predator and completely blind malice. He growled at her, blaming the entire catastrophe on her unbelievable stupidity. He stated that every contract had been signed by her own hand. Satoshi laughed nervously and called her a useful idiot. He said directly that if he went to prison, she would sit beside him as an organizer of the scheme. He did not manage to finish his pathetic tirade. A deafening crash of broken glass from the balcony and a powerful blow at the door cut off his speech. A metallic voice from a police megaphone ordered them to open the door immediately. Tokyo police had begun a hard assault on the elite penthouse. Satoshi froze like a stone statue. The bag of money slipped from his weakened hands, and bundles of dollars fanned beautifully across the floor. The armored door groaned under the blow of a heavy ram. The hinges flew from their sockets, and armed special officers burst inside. The former invincible ruler of a corporate empire obediently lay on the expensive carpet while an officer brutally twisted his arms behind his back. Akiko sobbed loudly, curled into a miserable ball near the sofa. A female officer monotonously read her rights and placed handcuffs on her thin wrists. I calmly ordered the driver to approach the penthouse building exactly as the reinforced convoy was leading the criminals roughly into the street. Dozens of cunning journalists with microphones already crowded around the luxurious entrance, mercilessly blinding the arrested people with camera flashes. All Japan was now greedily watching live as the life of a magnate and his favorite collapsed with terrible and inevitable thunder. I stepped very slowly out of the car and stood in the first row just behind the thin line of police cordon, hands relaxed in my pockets. Satoshi was let out first. His head was lowered as far as possible. He tried in vain to hide his face from the lenses, but the escorts held him firmly. Right behind him, stumbling at every step and choking on hysterical tears of hopelessness, police led the broken Akiko. She reflexively raised her tearful eyes, trying in deep despair to find some reliable support in the noisy crowd of onlookers. And at that exact moment, her gaze, widened with animal horror and panic, crossed my absolutely cold observation of the finale. Akiko stopped sharply as if rooted in place, forcing the escort to jerk the short chain with irritation. Her eyes became enormous with shock. She stared at my confident figure and at lawyer Hiroshi, who was businesslike handing folders of documents to the senior inspector. The stern tax service inspector nodded respectfully to me, while accepting the final irrefutable evidence that closed the case forever. I did not say a single word to her. My piercing look from above was 1,000 times more eloquent than any loud accusation. There was not a drop of petty gloating or burning anger in it, only emptiness and a statement of fact. The tumor had been removed. In her shocked, empty head, the whole puzzle came together with a deafening ring. She clearly understood that a ruthless monster had slept in her bed. She whispered my name with dry lips before the escort's rough push forced her to step into the dark body of the van. 2 hours later, when the metropolis sank into twilight, my phone gave a short signal. I knew exactly who was on the hidden line. Akiko was using her only allowed call from the detention center. I pressed answer and heard her broken, hysterical breathing. "Kenji, I beg you." Her voice slipped into whining. "I understand everything now. It was you. You planned all of this from the very first day." She cried nonstop, begging me to stop the nightmare. She swore that Satoshi had deceived her and that we could start over from a clean page. I silently listened to her for 30 seconds, allowing that hypocritical trash, dictated by wild fear of real prison, to pour out. When she fell silent, greedily waiting for my answer, I spoke. "This is not revenge, Akiko. It is simply a systemic audit, and you failed it. Goodbye." I ended the call before she could make another scream and blocked that incoming number forever in my database. Narita International Airport greeted me with its familiar hum of voices and the bright neon light of endless advertising boards. I checked in for a first-class flight. My baggage remained in my former life, and the new suitcase contained only what was necessary. Satoshi's criminal system had been destroyed to the foundation. His empire was torn apart by creditors, and every pawn had gone behind bars. I took out my phone and opened the contact list. Only one number remained that connected me to the beginning of the story, Taro's number. Yesterday I had transferred a huge sum to his account, enough to guarantee that his family would never need anything for the rest of their days. His debt to me was fully repaid. I erased his contact from the device, cutting the final thread to my past. The announcer called boarding for my flight. I looked at the electronic departure board, calmly watching the routes. I was no longer the boring salaryman everyone despised, but I also did not plan to return to the chair of an anti-crisis boss. I had found the perfect balance between these worlds. I became a ghost who comes only when lies become law. For the first time in a long while, a sincere, calm smile appeared on my face. I turned and confidently stepped into my new life,